Hey guys, today's video is a little bit different. I'm not going to be creating art per se, but I am going to be reviewing my new watercolor palette that I got this week. I'm super excited to open it up because this is a set of artist grade professional watercolor paints. It's the St Petersburg watercolors. I got the pan of 36 colors, which is nice for a studio palette. I was umming between the travel palette of 12 or the studio palette of 36, and I just decided to get the set of 36 so I can actually swatch and try out all the colors that they have in this range. These paints are really beautiful, and because they are artist grade professional watercolors, they put on the outside of each color their corresponding number and their light fastness and other additional information such as how transparent they are and if they granulate and whatnot. So you've got all of that information accessible on the paint wrappers, if you could call them that. They kind of look like sweets, and you've also got it on the back of the box if you want to reference it there. So these are a set of 36 full pan watercolor paints. The Cotmans that I currently have are half pan paints, so these are approximately double the size, and you get quite a bit of paint in them, which is quite cool. I always love unwrapping paints, so I always have a system of doing it as well. I'll always open them all up, and then I will swatch them in like a separate swatch book or like on a swatch piece of paper, where I can then rearrange my colors how I want them to be placed. Because usually the way that they arrive when you first get them, they are already in a set order, but it's not really the order that I prefer to use as an artist. Every artist, I'm sure, has their own preferences of how they like their paints to be laid out, and I am one of them. It also gives me a nice indication of the colors that I'm working with, and it also makes my sketchbook look quite pretty by having all of these swatches. So this is the first sort of off the bat look at what I've got. You can see I've drawn a bunch of arrows of where I want to move certain colors and switch them around. So I spent a good like half an hour or so switching and swatching and mixing them around to how I wanted to have them. And then I used the swatch card that was provided in the box, and I just wanted to put all the swatches on in the order that I had officially rearranged my colors into. So off the bat, I really like all of these colors. They're so rich and vibrant and colorful. They really stand out a lot, and they're just so colorful. Like, they're just so vivid. I really like them, and I can't wait to do an artwork with them. So then I just brushed off my brush on a piece of tissue paper, and this is the official nice beautiful swatches. So let's wait for these to dry. So as I mentioned, I have a swatch book where I swatch a whole bunch of colors and I rearrange and I figure out what I want for travel palettes, and this is my swatch book, and I really like it and enjoy it. If you go through any of my sketchbooks, they're usually full of color. As you can see here, I've swatched two different parts of this palette in particular to be able to rearrange them, and this was the final palette that I ended up with in the end. Lately I've been doing really well on TikTok creating natural paint from all sorts of natural elements, and these are the swatches for those. Okay, so I wanted to show you the difference between the Winsor and Newton Cotman palette, the full size palette, and my St Petersburg watercolors. The St Petersburg watercolors are, the palette is slightly larger, but it's about the same length. As I said, the Winsor and Newton Cotmans are half pan, whereas the St Petersburgs are full pan. I also tried to swap out the palettes, but they're not interchangeable, unfortunately. Moving into more of a swatch test, I wanted to show the difference between the St Petersburg watercolors and the Winsor and Newton Cotmans on like a swatch page. So let's begin. Please also excuse my nails. I am terrible when it comes to nail care, like looking after them, making them look pretty. I use my hands every day and they always get chipped, so please ignore those. Anyway, moving on. So on the bottom we have the Cotmans, on the top we have the St Petersburg colors. First off, I'm going to start with the yellow ochre color. I wasn't really impressed with yellow ochre in the St Petersburg palette. For me personally, I prefer it in the Cotmans. I just felt that the one in the St Petersburg palette was kind of washed out. I don't know, it just wasn't my favorite. And I'll probably use the Cotman one if I wanted to use yellow ochre. And the same goes for raw sienna. I felt the Cotman raw sienna was a bit more consistent than the St Petersburg one. So those were the two warmer hues that I wasn't really fond of. Okay, but ultramarine I loved in the St Petersburg palette. Look how beautiful and vibrant that is. But I was not such a big fan of the cobalt blue. As you can see here, the Cotman one is better than the St Petersburg one, and the same goes for the cerulean blue. I preferred the Cotman one over the St Petersburg one. I just felt like the cobalt blue and the cerulean blue in the St Petersburg were a little bit washed out. You can see here the Cotman ones, the greens look very washed out compared to the St Petersburg's one, so it really shows that how vivid and vibrant and beautiful they are. One thing I did notice was there was no sap green in the St Petersburg colors. Now, I use sap green a lot, but they do give you an olive green and a green yellowy color, which is beautiful. You can see here in the Cotmans that the yellows are definitely more washed out and not as vibrant as the St Petersburg ones, and you can kind of clearly see that. Same goes throughout, like the pinks and the browns and that sort of stuff. They're just a lot richer. I noticed here that the light red in the Cotman palette is very similar to the English red in the St Petersburg palette, and the burnt siennas, it's a little more orange in the Cotman one, a little more, got like more of a bluer undertone. Then if we look at indigo, I love indigo. The St Petersburg one is slightly darker and richer, and same goes for the Payne's Grey. So Payne's Grey is one of my all-time favorite colors. I love to use it because it's got a blue undertone, and yeah, I prefer to use that over black. I hardly ever use black. Again, you can just see how beautiful and rich all of these red sort of tones are. Like, they're just so gorgeous. Oh my gosh. And the purples, I use purple a lot for shadows. As I said, I like to sort of shy away from using the color black because it's so harsh, so the purple is a really nice contrast to reds, which works really well if you're doing some nice shadows. And yeah, so this is kind of like a nice little review of them. Oh, also looking at the sepia, you can see the sepia in the St Petersburg palette is darker and more consistent, so I really like that. And one other thing I want to point out is on the back of the box, it actually shows you the light fastness. So they've listed out on each of the paints high, medium and low light fastness. They've also got opaque, semi-transparent and transparent paints. They've got staining paints, semi-staining and non-staining, and then lastly they've also added a G for the paints that are granulating paints, which is quite nice because you can see off the bat which paints you're working with and what they can do and what they cannot do. So it's nice to have that information straight out on the back, readily available if you need it. Anyway, that's it for me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed this nice little swatch video and hopefully you learned something about these super cool paints. Yeah, I'll see you guys next week. Hope you have a lovely week. Don't forget to follow me on TikTok and have a great one. See you soon.